I think the brother is...
الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. So we're continuing with the issues of, or the timings or the situations of missing the Salāt and whether they're made up or not if you miss them. So last week we talked about if you forget or sleep through the Salāt. So we went through that, and then we talked about also the issue of when you're making them up, if it has to be in order once you're out of the time. So some of the other things to go through, or times where someone might miss the Salāt. So the next one to talk about is if someone is intoxicated. So we know, based on the Quran, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, لا تقربوا الصلاة وأنتم سكارى حتى تعلموا ما تقولون, or do not approach the Salat or come near the Salat if you're intoxicated until you know what you're saying, or until you're aware of what you're saying. And that's from Surah An-Nisa, verse 43. So here we see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbid anyone from praying in that situation, or approaching the Salat even, so meaning don't pray in that situation. And then said, until you know what you're saying. So he gave us the timing or the situation of when we would start being able to pray again. So this is, we know that you can't pray in that state. So what is, if the person misses it for whatever reason, if they're intoxicated, they have to make it up, and that's by consensus. So there's no difference of opinion that if someone misses the Salat because they're intoxicated, then they have to make up that Salat, regardless of how many there were. And as that's a matter of consensus, it was mentioned by Ibn al-Munthir in Al-Ijmâ, and Ibn Hazm in Al-Muhallâ, and Ibn Qudâmah in Al-Mughnî, and Ibn Nujaym in Al-Bahr, ar-Râ'iq. So we have the evidence from the Quran, and then we have that it's a matter of consensus. So really we don't need to go much more into that. The third or fourth, I guess depending on how we divide it, of when someone would miss the Salat is if they're unconscious. So here by unconscious we mean that it's not sleep, because we've discussed that, and it's not intoxication, so they haven't passed out from intoxication, because we've discussed that already as well. So we're talking about someone falls unconscious because of an injury or because of an illness, or they faint, or whatever the case is. So it's not owing to any medication that's been taken or any drugs that's been taken, because that's a separate issue. So it's just either medical or an injury. So on this issue of whether the person has to make the Salat up, there's two opinions. The first is that the person doesn't have to make that Salat up. So if the person fell unconscious before Dhuhr, and then they woke up the next day after Asr, they wouldn't pray Dhuhr. They would have to start Asr again. So Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib, Isha, and Fajr of that day, and then I guess Dhuhr depending on what time they woke up. So any Salat that the time had ended while they were unconscious, they wouldn't have to make that Salat up. And that's the opinion of Abdullâh Ibn Umar, and it's attributed to Anas ibn Malik, so those from the Sahaba. And from the Tabi'een, it was the opinion of Tâwûs and Al-Hasan and Muhyammad Ibn Sîrîn and Az-Zuhrî and Rabî'ah, who was the teacher of Imam Malik. It was also the opinion of Imam Malik and his madhab, and Ash-Shâfi'î and his madhab, Abu Thawr and the Zahiriyah. So what they say is that, they mention a number of things. So first of all, they say that the hadith that we talked about last week, where the Prophet ﷺ said, ألا إنه ليس في النوم تفريط وإنما التفريط على من لم يصلي الصلاة حتى يجيء وقت الصلاة الأخرى, or that the Prophet ﷺ said, there's no negligence in sleep, but this negligence is only if someone doesn't pray until the next Salat time comes. And in another narration of that hadith it says, من نام عن الصلاة أو نسيها فليصليها إذا ذكرها, or if any of you sleeps through the Salat time or forgets it, then he should pray it when he remembers it. So they say, or one of the evidences that they use is they say that this hadith only mentions the two situations of when a person would make up the Salat, and that's if they've slept through it or if they've forgot it. So any other time when it's missed, they say, otherwise the Prophet ﷺ could have said, if a Salat is missed, it needs to be made up. Just general, and would have included everything, or he could have added other situations in which the person would have to make up the Salat. So that's the first evidence that they use. The second thing is they use the narration from Abdullâh Ibn Umar radiallahu anhuma, and it's narrated by from his student Nafi', that he said, or أن Abdullâh Ibn Umar أغمي عليه فذهب عقله فلم يقضي الصلاة, or that Ibn Umar, so his companion or his student Nafi' said that Abdullâh Ibn Umar had passed out, or he had become unconscious, and then his mind went, so meaning that he wasn't aware of what was going on, so then he did not make up the Salat. And that's an authentic narration from him. It was narrated by Imam Malik and al-Bayhaqi as well. So they say that we have, first of all, the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, and then secondly we have the understanding of the Sahabi, and then third they say that the person who's unconscious, he's unaware of what's going on. So all of the rulings of the Sharia are addressed to someone who's aware of what's going on, who has his aql, or who has his intellect with him. So they say, in general, we know that, in many different instances, if someone is unable to understand the addresses of the Sharia, whether it's a command or a forbiddance, the person isn't held accountable for it. So they say if this person is unconscious, then he's not able to do this, and we have no evidence to say that he's similar to sleep or similar to forgetting, because we have those specific evidences for those things, but everything else where the person is unaware, he wouldn't be held responsible. They also say that some of them make qiyas, or they make an analogy between a person who's insane, because they say if a person is insane, then while they're in that state, they don't have to pray, and they don't have to make anything up once they become aware, or once they come out of their psychosis, or whatever the case is. They don't have to make anything up. So similar to how this is the state or the situation for someone who is unaware to the point while they're conscious, but they're unaware. Likewise, someone who's unconscious is the same thing, because they both share that characteristic of not being able to, to know what's going on, or to know right from wrong. They also say that, and these are again are intellectual arguments, they're not textual arguments, but they say that if the person is unconscious, they say if the person becomes unconscious, then he doesn't have his mind with him, and if he doesn't have his mind with him, he doesn't have to pray to begin with. So if the Salat wasn't obligatory on him in the time because he was unconscious and he was unable to do anything, then for him to have to making up something or redoing something, or this is all based upon it being obligatory to begin with. So just like if someone doesn't have an obligation on him to begin with, he can't make it up. He can't do it later on when he remembers, because originally it wasn't even obligatory on him to begin with. So how can you make up something that isn't obligatory because of the person falling on unconscious? So these are the arguments that they use, and as we see, it's the majority of the ulama. The second opinion is that it is obligatory if that it is obligatory in general. So they say that if the person misses this, he falls unconscious and he misses 1 or 2 or 5 or 10 or whatever, he has to make up those salawat, and that's the opinion of the Hanâbilah, and it's attributed to Ammâr ibn Yasir and Imrân ibn Husayn and Samurah ibn Jundub. But Allahu Alam whether those are authentic narrations from them or not. What they say is that generally if someone falls unconscious, it's not for a long time. So it would be, it's not something lengthy, like for example, if someone is insane, then it's going to be, it might be their whole life, it might be, for a month, it might be for a year, it might be for 2 years. So for them to have to make it up would be too difficult, but someone falling unconscious is generally not very long, so they would have to make it up. The third opinion is similar to this, but they say that if it's 5 or less, you have to make it up. If it becomes 6 or more, you don't have to make up any. And that's the main opinion of the Ahnâf. So they say that it's based upon the number. So if you have to do 5 or less, then you have to make it up and it's obligatory. If it reaches 6, you don't have to make up any anymore. And that's, like I said, the main opinion of the Ahnâf. And then the fourth opinion, again, it's similar to this one, but it was 6. So 6 or less, you make it up. 7 or more, you don't. And that's the opinion of Muhyammad Ibn Ash-Shaybânî, who was a student of Imam Abu Hanifa. So if we look at this, we can see that it's pretty clear that the first opinion is the strongest. Because just saying, well, you don't have to make it up because it's generally not lengthy, that's not a evidence in the Sharia. I mean, because define lengthy, first of all. Someone might say, well, I think having to make up 5 salawat is too hard. Or that I think, having to, being unconscious for a day is long, and another person might say, well, no, being unconscious for an hour is long, and someone else might say, well, no, 2 weeks is long. So it's not a defined thing in the Sharia. Secondly, there's no evidence to obligate it on them if we know that when you're awake you pray, and then the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that if it's done, if a person misses it because of forgetfulness, or if they miss it because of sleeping, then they make it up when they remember it or when they wake up. Otherwise, we don't have any other evidence to obligate anything. And then furthermore, even the opinion of the Ahnâf of saying, well, 5 or less or 6 or less, you have to do it, and if it becomes more, then that's even less textual based in the Sharia. So any questions so far about the intoxication part or the unconscious part?
Just one question.
Yeah.
What was the Sahabis that I was praying fell unconscious and didn't make up the Salawat?
Abdullâh Ibn Umar. Good?
Yep.
So the next situation where a person would miss the Salawat and then there's a dispute as to whether they would have to make it up is if a person is insane. Which, nowadays, I mean, there's different definitions, and, do they have enough of an intellect in a situation to know right from wrong? So that's, whatever we define it as in English, that's the basis of that whole argument. So the first opinion is that the person doesn't have to make it up again. So the same as the first opinion last time. And that's the opinion of the Malikiyya and the Shafi'iyya and the Hanâbilah and the Zahiriyya. So all except the Ahnâf again. What they use is they say, again, they use the hadith that we talked about if someone sleeps through the Salawat or forgets it, then they make it up when they remember it. So they say, well, this is the exception. Secondly, they use a hadith from Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu, in which Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu was brought a woman who had fallen into zina, and she was insane. So Umar radiallahu anhu had commanded for her to be stoned. So then Allah, as this was happening, Ali ibn Abi Talib came along and saw what was going on. So he asked Umar what was going on, and Umar told him. So Ali radiallahu anhu, he said to him, don't you know that the pen has been lifted off of 3 of the insane person until they come to, the sleeping person until they wake up, and the child until they reach puberty. or that he, in this hadith, the strongest narration, he didn't attribute it to the Prophet ﷺ directly, but the scholars have said, or those who have said that this is the authentic narration, have said that him saying, "Don't you know that this is the case?" is a way of attributing it to the Prophet ﷺ, because it's not in the Quran with these specific restrictions. So for him to say, "Well, don't you know that this is the case?" and then Umar agreeing, because in the hadith he let the woman go. So this shows that there was an understanding amongst the Sahaba that this was part of the Sharia. Or then the hadith is رفع القلم عن ثلاث عن النائم حتى يستيقظ وعن الصبي حتى يبلغ وعن المجنون حتى يعقل. So they use this hadith and they say, well, if the person isn't responsible to begin with, then in that state, so say they miss 4 salawat, it's not obligatory on them to begin with in that situation. So then when they come to, it's similar to a child coming of age and then being told, well, no, you have to pray everything that when it wasn't obligatory on you to begin with. Because if something wasn't obligatory, how can we then say, well, now the obligation starts, so you have to make up the things that weren't obligatory on you to begin with. It doesn't, then that means it was obligatory on them to begin with in that state. So that's the main argument that they use. And then again, the argument for the opposite is similar to the other opinion. So they say, well, once they come to, well, now they can make it up, and then so they have to make it up. And again, it's pretty obvious in this one, even more than the other one, that the obligation isn't, or that they don't have to make up the salat if someone is psychotic or if someone's insane. When they come to, they don't have to make up any of the salawat that they missed earlier on. The next one, and this is more of a discussion, and it's one that people ask about a lot more, is if the person intentionally leaves the salat. So, they know that it's obligatory, so it's not an issue of ignorance about the topic. Likewise, they're awake, so they didn't sleep through it, they didn't forget it, they're conscious. All of the other conditions aren't met, that we've talked about already, but the person just decides, I'm just not going to pray the salat. Do we say then later on that once they decide to again, that they have to pray that salat if the time is gone? Or do we say the time is gone and it's not obligatory upon them to make it up? So again, there's two opinions on this topic. The first is that they have to make it up. So if the person decides, I'm going to miss, I just don't feel like praying Fajr, according to this opinion, they have to make it up later on. If they do it for a day, if they do it for a week, if they do it for a month, as long as they know the obligation and consider themselves Muslim, that they would have to make up all of these salawat. And that's the opinion of the Ahnâf. It's actually the opinion of the 4 madhahib, or the main opinion of the 4 madhahib. So what they use for this, or the evidences that they use, first of all, they say the salat is obligatory in general. So if someone just decides not to do it, it doesn't fall off of them, because it's still obligatory. You can't just say, well, I don't want to do it, and then now they don't have to do it. I mean, that negates the whole idea of something being obligatory. So that's the first argument that they use. They say that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةِ, or the Prophet ﷺ said the salat, or anytime he commanded the salat to be performed, there was nothing mentioned that if it's in the time, do it, if it's not, then don't do it anymore. It was just general. So they say that that's the first evidence, or one of the evidences. They also say that the same hadith that we've talked about many times, that if you forget the salat or if you sleep through it, to make it up later on, when you remember, they say if the person who's forgetful or sleeps through it, and we know there's no sin on them, if they pray the salat when they remember, then the person who did so intentionally is more deserving of having to pray the salat when they decide to. Because how could we say that someone is forgetful and they have to do something to make up for it, or to, it doesn't fall off of them, but the person who is intentionally leaving an obligation no longer actually has to do that. So they say this hadith is evidence for this as well. They also say that, or they make a qiyas, and they say that if someone intentionally leaves a fast of Ramadan, then they would have to make it up. So the Salawat is the same, because they're both obligations and they're both from the arkan of Islam, so the obligation would still remain. Another argument that they use is they say that it's a debt. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded you with something, you owe it to Him to do, or in the sense that you have to fulfill that obligation. If you don't fulfill it in the time, you still owe it, but you'd be sinful, or you haven't done it the way it was supposed to be done, but you still owe it because it was something that was obligatory on you to begin with. And then they mention about this, the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ, when he said about someone who had come and asked the Prophet ﷺ about making up the Hajj for their parent, and the Prophet ﷺ had said, if your parent had owed money to someone, would you pay it for them, or would you fulfill that obligation, or take care of that loan? And he said yes. So the Prophet ﷺ said, فَدَيْنُ اللَّهِ أَحَقُّ أَنْ يُقْضَى, or that the debt to Allah is more deserving to be fulfilled. So they say this hadith shows that if we owe something to a human, we have to do it, even if there was an agreement. You said to somebody, I'll borrow $1,000 from you and I'll pay you back in a year, and then the year passes and you just decide, I'm not going to pay it back. It doesn't fall off of you, and then there's nothing on you. Like, you still have to pay it back. So they say, this hadith shows that the obligation is, the obligation of something that you owe to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is even more deserving of being fulfilled. So these are the evidences that they use. The second opinion is the opinion of the Zahiriyah, and Ibn Taymiyyah chose this opinion as well, and Ibn Rajab. So both of those are from the Hanâbilah, and then the Zahiriyah, obviously, we know. Their opinion is that you don't have to make it up. What they say is, they say from the Quran, we have when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, فَخَلَفَ مِن بَعْدِهِمْ خَلْفٌ أَضَاعُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَاتَّبَعُوا الشَّهَوَاتَ فَسَوْفَ يُلْقَوْنَ غَيًّا, or that, and after, so he's speaking about a specific type of people, or group of people. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, so after them came a people who lost the salawat, and they followed their desires, and then they will end up falling into ghayy, or they'll reach ghayy. And we talked about what ghayy is before. Linguistically, it has its meaning, and also some say that it's a specific valley in Jahannam. In any case, the point is that here, the tafsir of this is that they didn't pray on the time, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that they lost it. So it's if you lose something, it's gone. You can't just grab it again. It's something that's gone for you, while it's lost at least. So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described people not praying on time as that they've lost the salawat, then if something's gone, it's gone, and you can't make it up. It's not that you don't have to make it up, it can't be made up. So that's the first thing that they use. And then they also mention that the Prophet ﷺ said, or in the hadith, من فاتته صلاة العصر فكأنما وتر أهله وماله, or that in the hadith from Sahih Muslim, that the Prophet ﷺ said, whoever misses Salat al-Asr, then it's as if all of his family and his wealth has been taken away, or has disappeared. So they say here that the Prophet ﷺ described that fatatu Salat al-Asr, so that the Salat itself is gone from him. It's something that's gone, he can't catch it anymore, it's missed. So they say that this shows that once the Salat is gone, except for in the situations that we know of, which is the forgetting it and sleeping through it. In other cases, if a person just decides not to do it, then the Salat is gone. And then they have other arguments as well. They say that it's a salat, or it's an ibadah or an act of worship that belongs to a specific time. So once the time is gone, then the salat, that ibadah is gone. Like if somebody wanted to make, they wanted to do, or they decided, I'm not going to do Hajj this year, and then the time goes, they can't just say, I'm going to do it now. Like it has a specific time. If you intentionally leave it out of that time, then it can't be done. You can't make that up. So this is in general, but then also we know that there's the opinion that if you don't pray, that you're not Muslim. So if we take that opinion, and this is the argument that many of them use, they'll say that if you miss a salat, you've left Islam. So if you decide to pray again, you're coming back to Islam, and and the person who comes back to Islam doesn't have to make up things that were missed during their time of disbelief. So there's two approaches to it. One is that they weren't Muslim, and we've talked about that at the beginning of the Salat lesson, so you can go back to that if you want to. So if we take that approach, then that's the reason why they can't make it up. And if we take the other approach, then the other arguments are still valid for that. So about this, because there's more discussion than the other ones that we had. Is there any questions about what I'd mentioned?
What's their evidence though that you can't make it up? Because the hadith, it's like it's left you, so the ajr and the khair, so you can still interpret that by saying you're sinful, or you left the deen, or whatever, depending on the opinion that you take. But why does that translate to you can't make it up?
Well, what would be the evidence that you have to make it up? Like, so if we come at it from the other way, like if we say nothing's obligatory until we have an evidence. So now the salat was obligated in a time, you decided just to not do it, so that's gone now. What's the evidence that you would have to make it up after that?
I guess, is there evidence, I don't know, but is there a specific evidence that allows that exception in the Siyam?
Like that if you intentionally left it? Not that I know of. And inshallah we'll get into it in the time of...
Because like to me it just makes like if you adopt that approach with the Siyam, then the qiyas makes like it's not a far-fetched qiyas. Like
right.
It's reasonable.
Yeah.
But if I guess it boils down to some fundamental concepts, right? Like because we fundamentally believe that khalas, like either you became a non-Muslim or it is a specific ibadah at a specific time period, then there's no dispute of whether or not you had to do it, but you just can't make it up. Khalas, it's gone. It's just like
it's
like giving a sadaqah. You fail to give at this opportunity, that opportunity's gone. It's not going to come up until the next opportunity.
Yeah, I guess so some of the issues like when it comes to I guess first we'll start with the Siyam. Like, so the analogy between the two, there's no specific evidence that if you leave it intentionally that you would make it up. So, and we'll get into that. Like some say that if you intentionally miss the fast, like you can't make it up. But even if we, let's say for the sake of argument, we say that you can make it up and you have to make it up, the fast, if you just intentionally leave it. So what they would say, the ones who hold this opinion, is they'll say that, but this is either, like the Zahiriyya will say, well, there's no qiyas. We don't accept that argument to begin with. That's making an analogy between two things without evidence we don't accept. Others will say, maybe we accept the idea of qiyas in general, but here there's too many differences for us to say they're the same. So for example, the salat, there's 5 a day, fastings once a year. Salat, if someone who's menstruating or someone who's in postpartum bleeding, they have to make up the fast, but they don't have to make up the Salât. So there's another difference, and they'll list the differences to show that even if we were to accept the idea of qiyas in this situation, it doesn't apply because there's too many differences. So that would be the argument that they would say.
Are you done, sir? So I wanted to ask one thing.
Yeah.
Wouldn't the strongest thing though, if you take the opinion that someone leaves Islam if they miss a salah, then, like how you said that, isn't that like the strongest dalil for the other side to say that you don't have to make it up because you're not accountable for you're not held accountable for what you missed in the time of Kufr once you come to the Deen, right? Once you come to Islam, so isn't
right.
that wasn't the strongest dalil?
That is, I mean, so if you take that opinion, then it kind of ends the discussion.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't take that opinion, then there's still the discussion, of well, what do we do? What do we do now? Like if the person was Muslim the whole time, and they did something as a sin, do we then say that the person who did something as a sin is more deserving of not having to do something than the person who didn't sin, which is the forgetful person? So one of the arguments that's put forth, for the opposite is they'll say we're looking at it wrong. So we're looking at the Salât as though it's a punishment. It's something that you lost that virtue. You can no longer do it. So, you kind of like, you're out, like we say, like out of luck. Like, it's not something, you owe something extra. It's you lost your opportunity to perform that khair. That's almost like the punishment itself, and you can't make it up. So that's kind of the argument that they say opposite to that.
Sure. Okay. And just as a side thing, to leave in the salah, you said when somebody they left the salah, that makes them leave Islam. And if you take that opinion, of course, and when you come back and you pray the next salah, for example, they're back in Islam, right?
Yeah.
Do they have to? Someone who does that, do they have to take the shahada again to enter Islam again? If you believe that they left Islam from leaving the salah, or is coming back to the salah in of itself just revives their deen, revives their Islam?
According to if those who, as far as I know, they say that coming back to the Salât is how you come back to Islam. And what they'll mention is they'll say, the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man salla salatana wa istaqbala qiblatana wa akala dhabihatana fadhalika al-Muslim," or whoever prays our prayer and faces our qibla and eats our dhabiha, then that's the Muslim. So they'll say, and again, there's some problematic parts with using that as evidence, but they'll say, well, him doing the Salât is his Islam. Him starting to pray is him becoming Muslim. And also they'll say that it contains the Shahada. Allahu Alam, I mean, that part I don't really agree with, but the coming back to the Salât, it's a pretty strong opinion that brings them back to Islam, and that they wouldn't have to say the Shahada first.
Okay, sorry, is that because they didn't negate the Shahada, they negated the Salah, you know what I mean? They didn't stop believing, or they didn't stop saying that they're wrong, so they didn't stop believing in it? They just
they said it first, I mean, they had already stated it before and had already been Muslim, and they're coming back from that in that way.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's kind of the argument, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Actually, there has been past situations when Muslimin left Islam and then came back in the time of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu.
Right.
So, do we have any narrations when these former Muqtadeen came back to Islam, they took Shahada?
Not that I know of, no. I mean, they would be told to make tawbah from their ridda. And, as far as them, having to say the Shahada again, I don't know off the top of my head. Yeah.
But isn't that a condition
For what?
for one's Islam?
It is, yeah. So I guess if they're in apostate where they had already accepted it before, so the acceptance of it isn't being questioned. It's more how do they actually come back to the deen, and if their ridda was from leaving the Salât, then them coming back to it fulfills that.
What about in like Surah Al-Tawbah, the Istikhaba were not hypocrites, but they made istihza, and then, you know, is there any further narration on that? Because I know it just stops at the Prophet just repeating the verses, and
Yeah.
they've been affirmed to be
Yeah.
disbelievers. Like, did they just make tawbah and that was it?
I don't know of any specific evidences that say that they said the shahada or anything like that, but you know, I know originally to come into Islam you need to obviously, but whether if it's a repentance from leaving,
Is
then
sufficient? Okay.
Allahu Alam. Yeah. How do you get to the questions then? 'Cause there's
For the actual
open this.
I did not get to talk to him.
Can you tap on
Started this conversation like 4 weeks ago.
that? Oh, I had it up. I had it last time. If I can find it. Oh, here. It's not working either. Huh? So the question here from the on the computer is, what's the correct opinion? Does a person go out of the fold of Islam by not praying, or is he still in Islam? Talked about that before in detail. If we go to, I think, recording 1 to 4, I have a discussion on it. The stronger opinion is that they do leave Islam if they don't pray. The only issue is, do they leave Islam by one or not? So one opinion is that one salat is sufficient. The other opinion is that if they miss more than they pray, then that's when they leave Islam. And then the other one is that they don't pray at all. Allahu Alam, the stronger opinion is that it's one. And the reason for that is the evidence is general. So if we say that if someone's missed one salat, they've missed the salat. So for us to say that it's, has to be all of them or most of them, we're adding something extra. Likewise, that's the narrations from the Sahaba that we have, that it's if someone misses one salat until the time goes out intentionally, then they've left Islam. So Allahu Alam, that seems to be the stronger opinion. The only problematic thing is there's a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ accepted from someone to pray 2 salawat in the day at first, when they first come to Islam. So some explain that as being something specific from the Prophet ﷺ, that he allowed that. Others say that it was a means of the person coming into Islam and then knowing that they would start praying regularly. Others say that maybe that was before. So that hadith is unclear as to how it would be used or how it would factor into the discussion. So
just on that point,
Yeah.
because leaving the salah intentionally, like sometimes there's, especially if you're in the winter when it gets times very tight, you would factor something in, like, okay, I'm going to be, like I frequently see this as an issue with physicians. They would say, I'm seeing patients from this time to this time, but I'm going to go and make my salah in this 10-minute period.
Yeah.
But then something comes up, but that's, work and being busy, and like that's not a religious excuse for not praying,
Right.
to the best of my knowledge.
Yeah.
So if they missed out salah,
Well, it depends.
I've
I
heard
mean,
people saying like they do jama', they make their intention of jama'
Yeah.
because of haraj or whatever, because of the time.
Yeah.
But like, does that fall under that category?
if they in that situation, that they're allowed to do jama', they're allowed to combine. So if they intended that, I mean, then they've prayed in an acceptable time for that salat. Like, you can pray Dhuhr and Asr time if you intend to perform the jama'. So that's not really an issue. I guess the issue is if a person is saying like, okay, well I have say 2 hours to pray dhuhr, I'm going to pray at, whatever time. So they specify that time because they know their situation. And then that time comes and something's in and they're like, okay, I probably can still catch it. I'm going to go whatever. And then, so in that time, they're not intentionally praying out of the time. They're neglectful in the sense that they should have done better to manage their time and to think about the Salawât. But they didn't make a conscious decision to, I'm not going to pray the Salawât, or I'm going to pray later on out of the time. They were intending it in the time. Something came up. Okay, I'll probably still make it. I'll do my best to whatever, and then the time goes. It's neglectful.
So just ithm, like the...
Yeah, but for them to, they didn't intentionally leave the Salat out of the time. So you can differentiate between the two of those.
So it's based on the niyyah, even though the outcome may be...
Right, because they have to, just like if someone wasn't aware of the time, they look up and Asr is done, and they're like, well, okay, well, I guess, they didn't intend to miss it. Yes, they were forgetful, but this one is almost like forgetfulness in the sense that they're not managing their time correct. They're like, well, I could probably catch it. So it's the same, almost like a misjudgment.
Salah,
Right, and so that's why, if you're forgetful, there's no sin on you. In that situation, it would be sinful because you're playing with the salat like you're taking it lightly. So, but as far as to say that it would fall under the type that would take someone out of Islam, I can't see that being the case at all.
So is that the people al-Subhanahu discovered on Salatihim Sahun?
Yeah, so they're neglectful. They don't really give it a big priority. They don't give it a lot of weight, and then the time's gone. So that would fall under that.
I have a question about leaving Salat a little bit. It's similar in a sense, but it's different as well. So if somebody, and the question is obviously about does it apply and are they atham for this? If for example, because right now, as you know, the time between the Salat are short, especially between Dhuhr and Asr.
Yeah.
So if some brothers, they work together and they plan to pray at a certain time, Jama'at, they always pray together.
Yeah.
And it's after, let's say, Adhan is like 12:25, and they pray at 1 o'clock, okay? Or
Okay.
1:15 or 1:30, whatever the case may be, and Asr is at 2, right?
Yeah.
So they're going to go pray at the time, and they all could have obviously prayed ahead of time when the Salah first entered.
Right.
But they prayed Jama'ah at that specific time. Then while they're praying Jama'ah, one of them has to relieve themselves.
Yeah.
They're ill, they go to the washroom. By the time they're out, the time for Asr already came in.
If it was something, it comes down to whether it was negligent or not. So if they were like, okay, you know what, if we plan to pray in a time where, like, say there's half an hour left, so then if we catch it, if we pray at that time, we have still 25 minutes before the time ends. Even if I'm praying and I break my wudu, I'll still have time to go back and make wudu and come back and pray on time. If, something happens where, I have to break the salat for like a work reason, like something valid, I can still come back and catch it. If they factor those things in and then something comes up, then inshallah there's no sin on them. But if they're like, they push it to like 5 seconds left of the time, or 5 minutes, where they're like, if one thing comes up, then the time's going to be gone. Well, now they were neglectful.
Mm-hmm.
So it comes down to whether they actually paid mind to it, and that they gave it its due right.
Mm-hmm.
But if someone's like, okay, well, it takes me 4 minutes to pray Asr, and I only have to catch 1 rak'ah, before the time's done, so I'll start at 1 minute before the time, and then I broke my wudu, and that's now you're neglectful.
And would it be, in a sense, cheating if, for example, that person was in the washroom and the other brother tells him the Salat al-Asr is going to come in about a couple minutes, and that person makes the niyyah to do Jama'ah because they know they're not going to make it?
They shouldn't make a habit of it because,
No, definitely not a habit. It's just obviously once in a blue moon kind of thing.
No, inshallah there's no, because they're praying out of the time now for a need.
Okay.
So inshallah, but if it was like every day, the person's like, I'll just pray later out.
No.
And then you just pray, then it's now they're being neglectful of the salat.
Okay.
So each person has to look at it, their own situation and judge themselves, and knowing that they're going to be judged.
Okay.
What if somebody's intentionally leaving the Salah because of suffering from like a low iman?
Mm-hmm.
How does that play in a factor? Like, he wants to, but he's just obviously suffering.
Yeah.
From one of those downs.
Yeah. Then that becomes like a dangerous situation where, it's something has to break that pattern, because missing the Salat, your iman goes, and then now you don't have iman, so you're not going to pray. Like at some point something needs to be addressed. To break that pattern. Otherwise, it's just a cycle where the cause of not praying is low iman, and then you're not praying is bringing your iman down, and then it's just
chicken and egg.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's not an excuse, but it's kind of a warning where the person realizes, okay, well, I'm missing it because of low iman, and this is not me missing it's not helping my iman. So I need to at least the very bare minimum, pray the Salat as fast as I can right at the end of the time. At least now I've done it, and then work their way up from there.
Okay.
I don't know if we're gonna come to it, but what about like some issues, like just building on that, like people who struggle with depression, or they have like waswas ahli or OCD.
Yeah.
So they're not in any of these categories because they're technically not, like they are aware of what they're doing.
Right.
How does that play?
A lot. If it's depression, it would depend on how severe it is. Like some people with depression can't wake up.
Yeah.
Other people are just, I get lazy a bit. Well, there's a big difference. You know what I mean? Like they're both depression, maybe even clinical depression, but the person isn't excused. Well, I don't feel like playing hockey anymore because I'm losing interest. So I'm excused from praying. Well, no, that's as opposed to someone who, either they can't even wake up or they're bedridden, and because in that situation, yes, maybe they're aware, but their thought process is being affected to such an extent where they're not really making a rational decision. They're not thinking clear. So in that situation, if it's actually affecting their ability to think clearly, then it would be excused. Yeah.
Because I had a patient as well. He had such bad OCD. Like he would keep repeating the wudu.
Yeah.
The time of the salat kept going out.
Yeah. So in that situation, for sure. Because the whole point of it is he's trying to do it correctly. So for us to say, well, then when we get, you missed it, you're trying to do it so correctly that, and you can't, break that compulsion. That now you're held accountable for that. It's volume, like it's a wrongdoing to that person.
Just to build on, because people have asked me this, and I don't feel like they have a gaming addiction.
Yeah.
Like especially with teenage kids now that they're like they're just so hooked up on their Facebook or their games online.
Yeah.
And it's becoming like they affect their school and all these things.
Yeah.
Does that just fall back to like knowledge of live to
and you know what, even in the dunya we might not even be able to say, okay, this person was responsible or not. It might be something where you're like, okay, well, you know yourself, but maybe you don't even know yourself, but if you are able to do it, then you are responsible for this, because it's such a personal, each situation is different than the other. You can give a general thing and say, if you're able to, then you are responsible. If you literally can't, and you can't break yourself away, and you can't, once you leave the computer or you leave the video games or whatever it is, you can't even think now, then Allah Alam, that might be excusable. But then then it would be obligatory on them to work on that, and they have to do what they can to break that if it's affecting the deen. Yeah. So this is the discussion on the issues of that relate to missing the salat and then having to make it up or not. There's one that I left out, and it's because I'm unclear on the issue, so I can't really pass anything on. And it's if someone takes if they're given some medication or something where they're anesthesia or something where they're knocked out. So now, what's the situation with that? Allahu Alam, I can't say. I mean, there's a difference of opinion. Some say that it falls under the same thing as someone being unconscious, because technically, I mean, literally they are unconscious. Others say it was by human doing with intention behind it. So it wasn't like an accident where someone, got in a car accident or fell off of something. There was a conscious decision made to give this person medicine. Others say, well, no, because they themselves made the conscious decision to take the medicine, a sleeping pill, whatever that. Allahu Alam, I can't really make a judgment on that myself. I think I'd have to research it more myself. So that's why I left that one out.
Akhi, this is about when this person misses the salah, whether he has to make up or not.
Right. So if someone they're in pain, so they take morphine or whatever the case is, something that knocks them out. If it was valid for them to take it in the beginning, then there's no sin on them, because they did a valid action that then led to something else. So the initiating or the initial action wasn't haram, but do they have to make it up or not? So that's an issue I can't really judge on.
So it's like the argument between the ijma' if you're intoxicated, you have to make it up.
Right.
Versus if you had like a isaba or ighma, like the
right. So which is it closer to?
Yeah,
does it fall? I mean, because technically you're unconscious.
It's between those two.
No one doubts you're unconscious, but also you're unconscious or you're unaware enough when you're intoxicated, and intoxication is done by your own hand as well. Intoxication is a sin though, and this one would be allowed. So there's a lot of discussion on to, what it would fall under and that kind of thing. And so I haven't really come to a conclusion myself.
There could be something on because I had these PDF files of all the Majma' al-Fiqh in Mecca. I think they discussed that issue. I'm not 100% certain.
I think they did, yeah. And then also, I know Muhammad al-Mukhtar al-Shinqiti has a book on Shar'i issues related to medicine, and he's a medical doctor as well. So I think it'd probably be good to check into that as well. So next, and we'll stop there for today, but next week, inshallah, we'll get into the times that are forbidden to pray in, what those times are they valid still, or are they abrogated, and does it count for every nafil salat, or does it only count for ones that are general, where there's no specific reason for them, like tahiyyat al-masjid and making up a sunnah salat and that kind of thing. So we'll get into that next week, inshallah. Allahu alam, and if there's any questions, we can take those.
Okay, one question about the unconsciousness. So the strongest opinion was the first one, that the salawat missed whilst it's unconscious. Obviously not like we're